All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into something pretty wild. DMT, you sent over some really interesting stuff,
Yeah.
including excerpts from Dr. Rick Strassman's book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. We're going to try to untangle what exactly makes DMT so potent and,
Right.
all those crazy experiences that people talk about and why scientists are so fascinated by it.
Yeah. What's crazy is that DMT, it's not some kind of lab creation or anything.
Right.
It's found in plants that grow naturally, and it's even something that's produced inside our brains. And it's
Whoa.
not even like a
Wow.
modern discovery. It's not new.
Hmm.
South American indigenous cultures, they've used it for centuries in like their spiritual practices and stuff.
So it's like our brains are actually capable of brewing up psychedelics on their own.
Kind of. Yeah.
That's amazing and a little unsettling at the same time. But
Yeah.
before we get too speculative, let's ground ourselves a little bit and talk about Dr. Strassman's research.
Okay.
He conducted some really rigorous studies in the 90s at the University of New Mexico, and he had all the right approvals and safety precautions in place. This wasn't like some fringe operation or anything. And actually, he even had funding from well-respected organizations like the National Institute on Drug Abuse.
Exactly. And I think that's important to point out because a lot of times DMT research gets kind of
Yeah.
written off as unscientific or, too out there.
Right.
But Strassman's work was super meticulous, and the findings,
Yeah.
they're kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah.
He injected volunteers with DMT and then had them document their experiences in great detail and the things that they reported.
Yeah.
The range of experience is astounding. Everything from, really intense personal psychological shifts to encounters with beings and these experiences.
Okay, hold on. Encounters with beings.
Yeah.
Now it sounds like we're taking a sharp turn into science fiction.
Yeah.
What were these volunteers actually experiencing?
Right. Well, it's important to remember we are talking about subjective experiences here.
Mm-hmm.
And the interpretations, they vary. But there's a really striking consistency in some of these reports. The volunteers often describe being in these technologically advanced settings and meeting beings that seem to possess, like, advanced knowledge and even attempts at communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like these random hallucinations.
Yeah.
There's structure to it. There's a shared narrative that kind of emerges from it.
Okay. Color me intrigued but skeptical.
Mhm.
Do you have any specific examples that kind of illustrate this? Because it's hard to wrap my head around how something produced in our brains could lead to such consistent reports of these otherworldly encounters.
Sure. So let's take Jeremiah, for example.
Yeah.
He described observing this being working at a console like it was almost monitoring an experiment.
Okay.
And then there's Dimitri, who encountered what he called disorderlies.
Disorderlies.
And he even had an experience of like sexual activation. It's almost like these beings were probing or interacting with his like energy systems or something.
Okay, now that's just getting weird. How do you even begin to make sense of something like that? Did Dr. Strassman offer any explanations for these bizarre encounters?
Strassman himself acknowledged that these accounts
Yeah.
really challenge our conventional understanding of the mind and reality.
Right.
He explored various interpretations, but ultimately he emphasized that we need a lot more research to really grasp what's going on.
So we've got these bizarre entity encounters, but you also mentioned experiences that mirrored near-death accounts.
Yeah.
That sounds like a whole other level of strange. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah. So when you think about the classic near-death experience, right, out-of-body sensations,
Mhm.
traveling through tunnels,
Right.
encountering beings of light, feelings of profound peace, a lot of the DMT volunteers described very similar things.
Really?
It's almost as if DMT is providing a window into this realm of consciousness that we typically only associate with being on the brink of death.
That's a pretty heavy concept to process. Do you have any specific examples from the research that illustrate this parallel between DMT experiences and near-death experiences?
Sure. So Willow, for example, she described traveling through a tunnel of light. She was guided by beings. There was music. And then ultimately she emerged into this brilliant white light.
Wow.
It's practically a textbook NDE,
Yeah.
but induced by DMT in this controlled setting.
That's a powerful image. Did this experience have any lasting impact on Willow? Did it change her perspective on life or death?
She reported that after these sessions, her fear of death significantly diminished.
Wow.
So the DMT experience actually provided her with a very direct visceral encounter with the possibility of consciousness continuing beyond the physical body.
That's incredible.
It wasn't just a fleeting visual.
Yeah.
It really shifted her perspective.
So we've got these entity encounters, the near-death parallels, and you mentioned earlier that some people had intense psychological breakthroughs. What were those like?
Think of it like this. Sometimes talk therapy can feel like you're chipping away at a brick wall with like a little chisel.
Yeah.
But for some volunteers, DMT was like using dynamite,
Yeah.
you know?
Wow.
Stan, for example, he struggled with really deep-seated anxieties for years.
Uh-huh.
And he found that these repeated DMT doses,
Mm-hmm.
they helped him confront and release those anxieties
Mm-hmm.
in a way that traditional therapy just hadn't been able to achieve.
Sounds like DMT bypasses our usual defenses and forces us to confront those deep-seated emotional issues.
Yeah, it kind of just breaks right through.
Head on. But what about the people who had negative experiences?
Right.
Weren't there some volunteers who had difficult or even terrifying encounters?
Yeah. Not every DMT journey is a blissful, otherworldly adventure.
Right.
Some volunteers did experience anxiety, fear, and even encountered entities that they perceived as malevolent or threatening.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge that DMT is a very powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
And these experiences, while they could be profoundly positive,
Yeah.
they can also be very challenging and unsettling.
That makes sense. It seems like we need to tread carefully here.
Yeah.
But before we delve further into those potential risks and challenges, I'm curious about something. If DMT is produced naturally in our brains, why don't we all experience these otherworldly realms all the time?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
That is the question that has puzzled researchers for years. One theory is that our brains actually regulate DMT production very tightly,
Okay.
perhaps only releasing significant amounts under very specific conditions, like during sleep, near-death experiences, or even moments of like intense stress or trauma.
So it's like there's this hidden mechanism within us that keeps the DMT floodgates closed most of the time.
Right.
But what's the purpose of that? Why would our brains produce something capable of inducing such profound experiences only to keep it so tightly regulated?
That's where things get really interesting. Some researchers speculate that DMT might play a role in dreaming,
Okay.
near-death experiences, and even the process of birth and death. Others believe that it might actually be involved in regulating consciousness itself,
Okay.
helping us to make sense of the world and our place in it.
Wow, those are some pretty big claims. But
Yeah.
before we get too lost in speculation,
Sure.
let's bring it back to Dr. Strassman's research.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that he had a fascinating hypothesis about the pineal gland. Can you tell us more about that?
Strassman proposed that the pineal gland, this tiny pine cone-shaped structure deep inside the brain,
Right.
might actually be the source of this endogenous DMT production.
Okay.
And it's a theory that has sparked a lot of debate and fascination,
I bet.
especially because the pineal gland, it has this long history of being associated with spirituality and mystical awareness.
So is there any scientific evidence to support this pineal gland hypothesis, or is it mostly speculation at this point?
Well, while Strassman's research didn't definitively prove that connection,
Yeah.
he presented some really compelling arguments and pointed to the pineal gland as like this promising area for further investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worth noting that even if the pineal gland isn't the primary source of DMT production, the fact that our brains produce this compound at all, it raises some really profound questions about its role in consciousness and the human experience.
Okay, so we've got this mysterious pineal gland potentially churning out DMT, and
Right.
this substance is capable of inducing experiences that range from the deeply personal to the utterly bizarre.
Yeah.
I have to ask, what happens when these DMT trips are over? Do people just snap back to reality, or is there some kind of lasting impact?
Many volunteers reported that their DMT experiences had a lasting impact on their lives.
Really?
Some experienced a decrease in anxiety and fear. Others reported a renewed sense of purpose or spirituality. It's like having a glimpse behind the curtain of reality.
Yeah.
It can permanently change your perspective.
That's pretty amazing. But let's be real, not everyone is going to be signing up for a DMT injection anytime soon.
Yeah.
What does all this research mean for the average person who might never experience DMT directly? What are the takeaways here?
I think the implications of this research go way beyond just the individual experience.
Okay.
It's really forcing us to rethink our understanding of the brain, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself.
So are we saying that DMT is proof of other dimensions, or that consciousness exists outside the brain? That's a pretty big leap.
It's important to remember that scientific inquiry is about exploring possibilities, not jumping to conclusions.
Right.
DMT research doesn't necessarily prove anything definitively, but it raises some seriously mind-bending questions that we just can't ignore.
Well, you've definitely piqued my curiosity,
But did
and I'm sure our listeners feeling the same way, but I think we need to take a break here and digest all this information when we come back. Let's explore some of the other fascinating aspects of DMT research, like those unseen worlds you mentioned,
so
and delve a bit deeper into the pineal gland mystery.
sounds good. All right, so let's jump back into this DMT rabbit hole. Where did we leave off?
Well, we were talking about Dr. Strassman's hypothesis that the pineal gland might be the source of DMT production in the brain.
Right.
You mentioned it's a theory that's caused quite a stir, and to be honest, I'm still struggling to grasp the implications.
Yeah.
I mean, if our brains are capable of producing this substance that can induce such profound experiences,
Yeah.
why aren't we all tripping out all the time?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
It's possible that the DMT our brains produce
Huh.
plays a very different role than the DMT that's administered in research settings.
Okay.
Perhaps it's released in like tiny amounts during specific states of consciousness, like deep sleep or meditation.
Huh.
And it might act more as a subtle modulator of perception and awareness rather than, a psychedelic sledgehammer.
Okay, so maybe it's not about these full-blown psychedelic trips, but more like these subtle shifts in our everyday experience. But even those subtle shifts could be pretty significant, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if DMT is influencing our perception of reality even in small doses, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and think about the pineal gland's association with spirituality and mysticism.
Yeah.
What if those practices, like meditation or deep prayer, what if they're actually tapping into this natural DMT pathway
Okay.
and allowing for these subtle but still profound shifts in consciousness?
So maybe those ancient spiritual traditions were onto something.
Could be.
They might have stumbled upon these techniques that subtly activate the pineal gland and allow us to access different states of awareness. It's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What does science actually tell us about the pineal gland and its functions?
Well, we know that it's this tiny gland located deep within the brain,
Uh-huh.
and it plays a crucial role in regulating our sleep-wake cycles by producing melatonin.
Right.
But some researchers believe that the pineal gland might have other functions that we're only beginning to understand,
Okay.
perhaps even playing a role in consciousness and spiritual experience.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
Yep.
But let's get back to those unseen worlds you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Those accounts from Strassman's research where people described encountering other realms and beings, you said there was a surprising consistency to those reports.
Yeah.
Which makes it even more intriguing and a bit unnerving. Can we dive into some specific examples?
Absolutely. So let's revisit Jeremiah's account.
Okay.
He described seeing this being working at a console almost as if it was monitoring an experiment.
Right.
And it's a recurring theme. These technologically advanced settings being seemingly in control, even attempts at communication.
Yeah.
It's as if these volunteers were plugged into this network of information and energy that exists beyond our everyday perception.
It's like they stumbled into some cosmic control room or an interdimensional internet cafe.
Right.
But what about Dimitri's experience, the one with the disorderlies? That was pretty wild and honestly a bit disturbing.
Yes. Dimitri's account was particularly unusual, even in the context of DMT research.
Yeah.
It touches on a sensitive area. The potential for these experiences to be not just profound, but also challenging, even disturbing.
I think it's important to acknowledge that especially as interest in DMT and other psychedelics grows,
Absolutely.
it's not all sunshine and rainbows. These are powerful substances that can induce experiences that are both amazing and unsettling. It's crucial to approach them with respect and caution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of responsible use and the need for proper preparation and integration support.
Right.
These experiences can be deeply impactful,
Yeah.
and sometimes they require careful processing and reflection.
Okay, so we've got these entity encounters, the near-death parallels, the psychological breakthroughs, and the pineal gland mystery. It's a lot to take in. Where does Dr. Strassman's research leave us? What were his main conclusions?
Well, Strassman acknowledged that his research really only scratched the surface. He emphasized the need for further exploration, suggesting that DMT might be a key to unlocking a deeper understanding of consciousness and the nature of reality. He proposed that our brains might be capable of perceiving a much vaster spectrum of reality than we normally do,
Wow.
and that DMT could be a tool for expanding our awareness.
So it's not just about the individual trip.
Right.
It's about what these experiences tell us about the human mind and its potential.
Exactly.
It's about expanding our understanding of consciousness and reality itself. But how do we go about doing that? Where do we even begin?
Well, one way is to look at these experiences through different lenses.
Okay.
We've touched on the spiritual interpretation, the potential for DMT to facilitate mystical experiences and insights.
Right.
But what if we look at it through the lens of neuroscience? What's actually happening in the brain when someone takes DMT?
That's a great question. I have to admit, I'm a bit lost when it comes to the neuroscience of psychedelics. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. So while we don't have a complete picture yet, research suggests that DMT interacts with various neurotransmitter systems in the brain, particularly the serotonin system.
Okay.
Serotonin plays a crucial role in regulating mood perception and consciousness. And DMT seems to disrupt those normal pathways in a way that creates these altered states of awareness.
So like a DMT is scrambling the signals in our brains,
Kind of.
leading to these profound shifts in perception and experience. But how does that explain the consistency of the reports, the recurring themes of entities in otherworldly realms?
Yeah.
It can't just be random neural firing, can it?
That's a key question that researchers are still trying to answer.
Yeah.
Some theories propose that DMT might be activating dormant neural pathways,
Okay.
or even facilitating communication between different areas of the brain that don't normally interact. Others suggest that DMT might be temporarily altering the brain's filter mechanisms,
Interesting.
allowing us to perceive information or energy that's normally blocked out.
It's like DMT is taking the brain off autopilot and allowing it to explore uncharted territory. Right.
But what about the potential risks we touched on? The challenging experiences some volunteers had. Are there any long-term risks associated with DMT use?
Well, while more research is definitely needed to fully understand the long-term effects,
Uh-huh.
most studies suggest that DMT itself is not physically addictive
Yeah.
and that the risks of lasting psychological harm are relatively low when it's used responsibly.
Right.
However, it's crucial to acknowledge that individuals with a history of mental health conditions, particularly psychosis,
Yeah.
they might be more susceptible to adverse reactions.
So it's not something to be taken lightly, and responsible use is essential.
Definitely.
But what about the therapeutic potential of DMT? You mentioned earlier that there's growing interest in exploring how psychedelics might be used to treat mental health conditions. Where does DMT fit into that picture?
DMT is actually showing promise in early clinical trials as a potential treatment for conditions like depression, anxiety, and addiction.
It's believed that the profound experiences that DMT can induce might help individuals break free from negative thought patterns, process trauma, and even facilitate a sense of spiritual connection that can promote healing and well-being.
So it's not just about exploring consciousness for the sake of exploration. It's
Right.
about potentially using those altered states to address real-world suffering. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But what about the pineal gland hypothesis? Has there been any further research into its role in DMT production?
Well, while the pineal gland hypothesis remains this fascinating area of inquiry, there hasn't been any conclusive evidence to confirm or refute it.
Okay.
It's a challenging area to study, given the ethical considerations of conducting research on the human brain, especially with a substance like DMT.
That makes sense. It seems like we're just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding DMT and its implications.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think we need to take another break here to process all this information when we come back. Let's wrap things up by exploring some of the ethical, social, and philosophical questions raised by DMT research and what it might mean for our future.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground in our exploration of DMT.
Yeah.
From, the wild experiences people report to the mysteries surrounding the pineal gland. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all.
Yeah, it is a lot to process, for sure. DMT, it really challenges our assumptions about the brain consciousness reality itself.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Right.
It forces us to ask some really big questions.
Yeah.
Questions that we might not have even considered before.
You mentioned earlier that we need to wrap things up by discussing some of the ethical, social, and philosophical questions surrounding DMT research.
Yeah.
Where should we start?
Well, one question that immediately comes to mind is this issue of accessibility.
Okay.
DMT, like other psychedelics, it's illegal in many parts of the world.
Yeah.
And this raises concerns about, equity and access, as well as the potential for harm if people are using it without proper guidance or support.
That's a valid point. On the one hand, we don't want to see these powerful substances being misused or exploited.
Right.
But on the other hand, restricting access could also stifle research and prevent people from potentially benefiting from these experiences. It's
Exactly.
a delicate balance, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah, it highlights the need for like thoughtful regulation and harm reduction
Huh.
strategies.
Right.
We need to find ways to make these substances available for research and potential therapeutic applications
Yeah.
while also minimizing the risks.
It's like we're navigating uncharted territory here.
Yeah,
We need to proceed with caution and respect for the power of these substances,
right.
but also remain open to their potential benefits.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Another ethical consideration is the potential for DMT to be used in manipulative or coercive ways.
Oh,
We need to be vigilant about protecting vulnerable individuals
right.
and ensuring that these experiences are approached with integrity and respect.
That's a crucial point. We need to be mindful of the power dynamics at play,
Mm-hmm.
especially in therapeutic or spiritual contexts.
Right.
It's important to create safe and supportive environments where people can explore these experiences without feeling pressured or exploited.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
let's consider some of the philosophical implications of DMT research.
Right.
We've kind of touched on this throughout our discussion,
Yeah.
but it's worth emphasizing that DMT, it really challenges our materialistic worldview.
Okay.
It suggests that there might be more to reality than meets the eye,
Uh-huh.
that consciousness might not be limited to the physical brain.
It's like DMT is poking holes in our current understanding of the universe,
Yeah.
hinting at the possibility of other dimensions, other realms of existence that we can't normally perceive.
Precisely. And this raises some profound questions about the nature of reality itself.
Yeah.
What is real? What is consciousness? These are questions that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries.
Right.
And DMT research is kind of bringing them to the forefront of scientific inquiry.
It's both exciting and a bit terrifying to think that we might be on the verge of a paradigm shift
Yeah.
in our understanding of the universe and our place in it.
It's definitely a time of great upheaval and transformation in many fields, not just in science.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see how psychedelic research is contributing to this shift,
Yeah.
challenging our assumptions and expanding our horizons.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in DMT research?
Well, one of the most pressing needs is for more research,
Okay.
particularly well-controlled clinical trials to explore the therapeutic potential of DMT.
Uh-huh.
We also need to continue investigating the neural mechanisms underlying the DMT experience
Yeah.
and develop a more nuanced understanding of the risks and benefits.
And beyond the science, we need to engage in open and honest conversations about the ethical, social, and philosophical implications of DMT and other psychedelics.
Yes.
We need to approach these substances with wisdom and discernment, recognizing both their power and their potential pitfalls.
I completely agree. We need to be thoughtful and responsible in our exploration of these extraordinary substances,
Right.
while also remaining open to the transformative possibilities they offer.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of diving deep into the world of DMT today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I know I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on this mysterious compound.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it's inspired our listener to continue their own exploration of this complex and enigmatic topic.
Yes, keep researching, keep questioning, and keep an open mind. The world of DMT is vast and uncharted, and the discoveries that await us might just change the way we view ourselves, the universe, and the very nature of reality.